Welcome to How to Use Virtual Fields on a List Page. Hey, I'm Eric, and quite often you end up in a situation where if you're creating a list of something, and then you have to include information, you have to include columns that are not fields in the table that you are currently looking at. So you have to go somewhere else and get these other fields, and for at least for this video I call them virtual fields, not to be confused with virtual tables, which is something completely different. And there is a video on virtual tables somewhere on the channel. You can go search for it. If you're a subscriber, you've probably seen it. If you're not a subscriber, hey, I suggest subscribing. We got rainbows, unicorns, and virtual fields, at least in this video. So if we need to add something to a list that is not there in the source table, we have to do something. We have to make them fields, we have to make it appear to the end user that these are fields to a certain capacity. How do we do that? Well, that's what we're gonna experiment with in this video. So let's get right on to it. Here is Visual Studio Code. I've started a fresh extension, and I'm ready to create a new page. And I'm going to create a page with the AZAL DevTools wizard, which is an extension to VS Code, and I want to create a list called my customers, perhaps. Source table should be customer. We want a list. Application area all, usage list, and we don't need tooltips. I will click on right there and click on next, and then let's select some fields to add to this page: number, name, address, city, and I'll click finish behind myself. Click, and I got the page. Let's see if I try to compile this. This is weird. The thing already exists, but it's the only thing that's in here. So if sometimes AL compiler gets confused. I'm not sure why. If I reload the window, let's see, this is a big extension. Oh, my customers. There is already my customers. I need to, yell at me. Eric, read the error message. Let's change this to Eric's customers. How about that? That is not in base app. Sometimes I've seen you create something and it says, oh, it's not over there. So I immediately reload. Yes, I'm just used to reload. I think we're good now. Okay, so let's take a look at this list. So I hit F5 to deploy, and I got some old windows open here. Let me close them, and we got a list of the 5 usual customers plus a new one. So let's say that the customers say, oh, we have this relationship that is always a vendor and a customer with the same number. We want to show the name of the vendor. So we need to add a field, vendor name, which then what do we do here? Because we don't have a reg.vendor. Maybe we do. We have a get linked vendor, but I don't think we're going to use that function. So maybe we need to, let's create a function get vendor name, and that clearly doesn't exist. So I can hit either the blue thingy here, I can hit control dot to get the quick fixes, and or here's another extension I use, the AL code actions. So So I can create a procedure with that, tell it that we are a text field with no specified links. So let me actually just show you guys this. So apart from, of course I use the AL language thingy, but then I also use the AZAL dev tools to create the page here, and then I actually use David's AL code actions to create the function. So that's kind of those three are all the AL specific stuff that I have installed. So what can we do here? Well, we can do, let's keep it simple and think about the number thing. So we will create a vendor record, and then we'll go vendor.get, and then we'll use rec.number. So we'll just find the vendor that has the same number as our customer, and then we will exit vendor.name. So that's pretty good. Let's hit it. Let's see how this goes. I hit a 5. We're publishing. Uh-oh, now we got a breakpoint. Or break. We got an error. So there is no vendor with the C02240. So we remember I had a, let's see what happens if I hit a 5 and go through, then we just get an error and nothing. So I think we gotta do, if we can get the vendor, then we will return the name, otherwise we will not return anything. And AL is kind of weird, so now that we have specified a return type, there is in reality there is an implicit exit an empty string at the end of a function here. So if you don't exit anything and the type is and the function has a type, it will return an empty value of that type. But we don't need that, so let's see how it goes now that when I'm hitting F5. You could argue, and I would even listen to the argue that, so now we got the vendor name here, which looks exactly what we need, and there's nothing on this one. You could argue that, but Erik, that is sloppy. It would probably be better if you did this. So all paths through this function will have a return value, and yes, but BCL does provide the other thing. Of course, we could do stuff like that. Say no vendor, and then if we let's see how this goes. Deploy this again. Now we get a message here. So this is pretty good. But you see, this is field we can sort on the city. But hang on, whenever we're clicking on it, so if you're clicking on a real column, we get the menu ascending filters and this, and over here we only get what's this, which doesn't really help us, right? So clearly this column is a lesser column than the other ones, because this column is not part of the data set. So in order for it to become part of the data set, we cannot do this. So in many cases this would be perfect, but I cannot, as you can see, I couldn't get something from the column, and if I do list here, I don't get anything either. So this is a lesser column. So how can we change that? Well, we can let's comment this one out, and then say vendor name, and then let's vendor. So in order to not have a name class, vendor name control, and then just call it vendor name. So in this case, no, what is vendor name? Well, vendor name will have to be now a global variable. So now this one is happy. Let's see what's happening here. So the AL compiler, it used to be back in the world of nav that you have to tell that this thing was, should we put it just caption equal vendor, that you had to use an attribute on the variable saying that this variable is part of the data set. But the AL compiler is now clever enough to figure that out, so you don't have to specify that. And let's try the we still only get what this here. So let's see what happens if we actually say in dataset. I don't think there's any difference according to the wise guys at the friendly people at Microsoft. There's no difference here, but let's figure out how do we actually put a value in this one. Well, then we need to use a trigger, and a trigger is something that gets called in the page on different cases. And there's a bunch of, not a bunch, there's plenty of triggers. So the first one we want to use is the one called on after get record. And we will just grab most of this code from here actually. If vendor.get, then vendor name equal vendor.name. So if we can get one, then we will give this a value. I hit F5 again to publish. And you see this, so now we're getting hit by that case from before, because you notice that suddenly this one gets the wrong one. But otherwise this looks pretty nice. We're still not able to do anything here, but it's pretty nice. So what we would need to do is actually we needed to copy a bit more and say, because this is a global variable and we need to set it for everyone, then we need to say vendor name equal blank in this case. And I'll publish again. And now this one stays blank. So that was two different ways. The third way we could do is actually kind of create a field. So let's actually just create another field here. Say customer, customer extension. Let's create a table extension. I broke the compiler. You can feel it. I just feel it that I broke it. Table extension. See if we got anything. We don't got any numbers. So this happens once in a while. Let me reload the page and see if we're more happy. My customer. Oh. And we need to tell extends customer. Still not happy with me? Let's save this and reload once more. I think we're good now. Let's add fields here. We'll add a field, use the same number, vendor name, and this is a text 100 perhaps. Then we'll tell that this is a field class flow field. and a flow field needs a calc formula. In this case, we want to use what is known as a lookup. So I'm telling, okay, this is a lookup. Where do we want to look up? Well, we want to look up into vendor.name, where number, and this is the number in on the vendor, equals, in this case we want to equal a field. We could also, equal a const, or a const is a constant value, filter is a constant filter. There's a slight difference, but hey, in this case we want to make a field, and now we're selecting a field on the customer. So we're kind of specifying the same thing that we sort of are doing here. We are specifying as a flow field definition. So now there's a field called vendor name in a customer table, which then makes this thing slightly more complicated because we got rec.vendorName and vendor name. I think I'm quickly gonna change this one to vendor name txt, just so we know that this is a different one. And instead of this, I'm gonna come that one out, and then I'm gonna do field vendor name. So now vendor name is rec vendor name. And I could, there's different schools. Typically you go as soon as they editable false, because there's very few flow fields you would actually ever edit. But there are cases where being able to edit a flow field is pretty cool. So now we got the same thing in a slightly different way. If I click up here, now I have a true field. So I can go over here and filter by vendor name. I also get a no, if I click on this, because this is a flow field, I actually I'm taken to that vendor. So that's a pretty nice way of adding a field. So this field is virtual. So even though we created this field, just to be very clear, we created a field, a flow field, but the flow field does not live in the database. The flow field only lives in your object and is used and calculated on the fly. Depending on, so this operation is faster than, let me actually kill the debugger here. This operation is, and I'm going to say that this operation is faster than this operation, even though it's doing the same thing. But Microsoft can, because of this, they can do fancy SQL optimization and include and do this on a lower level than we can if we do this in AL. So this will be more efficient, but be aware that even though now we have a field here and we can do filter to this value and it works just fine because we have 5 records and 6 records in the table, this is not very good for performance. So be careful, and sometimes it's actually, depending if it's a big volume table and tons of users and stuff like that, you might not want to give the users the ability to filter on this because it will use so much power to do it that you might hurt yourself. So depending on your circumstances, no. Now we have 3. Let me see if I can put them all 3 on the screen. Here we go. So depending on circumstances, one method might be more suited than the other. and you can say, but hang on, one and two are the same. No, they're not. So think about, so get vendor name goes down, call the function for each row here, where vendor name txt gets it in the trigger. So let's say we needed two fields. We needed the name and the vendor address also. Well, if we used method 1, then we will have to call two procedures that will do two gets to the vendor table, and it's cached and all that, but there's still more AL code to execute for each line. So there will be two calls to get two fields, where if we're using method 2, then we only get the vendor once, and then we set, where are we here? We get the vendor once, and then we set both fields in the same call, which is, you know, you get two fields for the price of one. Where method 1, you'll get two fields for the price of 2. The same actually also goes for the flow field. So Microsoft might be clever enough to look and see there's 7 lookup flow fields that are going to the same place, and maybe we can be optimize it, or maybe not. So pros and cons on each method. I have a I like the added benefits you get from the flow fields. To be honest, I think I use all 3. I do use version 1 with a slightly more complicated interface. So I usually want to do this. So where do we have? Get vendor name. Let's just give this a different name so we don't clash with the global namespace here. So I usually go for passing this in, so this function is not dependent on rec at all. I like to keep functions like these free of rec, because then I can use them in other spaces. I can just call in and ensure that this function will only use the parameters, and it will return the thing, and there's no side effects, there's no need for a specific state, and so on. Anyway, that was 3 examples of adding virtual fields to a list page. If you want to see more AL hacking, tips and tricks and whatever, this video is selected for you by the almighty YouTube algorithm, so I know it's a good one. Check it out. I'll see you there. Take care. Bye.